Greetings, people of the webs. Jake here. Welcome to another edition of Reviews over Brews. So, for those of you who have not watched the previous episodes of this series, pretty much all I do is I review something, whether it be a movie, comic, TV show, book, whatever it may be, over my brew of choice. So, pretty simplistic, and my brew of choice is one of my all-time favorite beers, Weihenstephaner, which is from the world's oldest brewery in Bavaria. It is a Hefeweiss beer from Germany. So if you watched the last episode, I reviewed the Dragonlance Chronicles. That was also my brew of choice. Just happened to have it in my fridge. And I decided to review The Witcher, Sirens of the Deep. So, it is Netflix's most recent adaptation of the Witcher series. And I would say overall, so I guess a little bit of context. So I've read the Witcher books. And I really liked Season 1. Everything else has been not good, except for the other Witcher animated movie, Night of the Wolf, I think, which told the story of Vesemir, who was kind of Geralt's mentor figure. So that I really liked. But Witcher Seasons 2 and 3, not so good. And it deviated a lot from the books. So, with that out of the way, Sirens of the Deep is adapted from one of Andrzej Sapkowski's short stories, because actually the first two Witcher books are just a collection of short stories set in the world that he created, where it's just kind of Witcher the Witcher, Geralt on various adventures, kind of Monster of the Week type scenario. And so overall, Sirens of the Deep is a fairly faithful adaptation of that particular story. Now, it's been a few years since I last read that story and just the Witcher books in general. Probably, I think it's like back in 2021. Yeah, about 2021, so it's been about 4 years now. Ooh, excuse me. And I really enjoy the Witcher books, and that's kind of why I was disappointed with Season 2 and 3 of The Witcher, but digressing. So, all that to say, the movie, again, fairly accurately details the short story, where basically Geralt is traveling through Brennivore and comes across another bard named Essie / Little Eye is one of her nicknames, who's a childhood friend of Jaskier. And a lot of the events play out very similarly, where basically there's this brewing tension between the merfolk, which are just right off the coast, and the kingdom of Brennivore, where the prince he's kind of fallen in love with the mer princess, but the king and some of the people of Brennivore don't really approve, because, mer people, they're different, and then some of the mer people don't necessarily, approve of it either, because kind of similar reasons. But all that to say, so basically, Geralt, Jaskier, and Little Eye / Essie are basically kind of to figure out, essentially trying to prevent, an all-out war breaking out. There is a little bit of a conspiracy going on between, the two sides, not quite as deep as in the movie. Because, I guess, spoilers for the movie, the king and the mer princess's aunt are kind of, in cahoots with each other, because both of them are trying to basically prevent the mer princess and the prince from, getting together and kind of having, uniting the mer people in the kingdom of Brennivore. That, to my recollection, is something completely fabricated for this movie, to make it kind of a little bit more interesting, give it a little bit more, kind of pad the runtime, because, again, it's a short story, and, again, I'm pretty sure the Sea Witch, the aunt of the mer princess, I don't recall her being in that particular story whatsoever. And then kind of, I would say the biggest difference with this adaptation is the ending. And I understand why they kind of wanted the more, kind of a big battle for, the third act of the movie, just because in the book, or the story in that book, I can't remember if it was in the first book or the second book, but basically, right as the humans and merfolk are about to, have all-out battle, the mer princess takes a potion that basically turns her human, to where she can walk on land, and she kind of one of the similarities in the movie and in the books is so the prince and the princess, mostly the mer princess, is kind of noting that like the prince isn't quite willing to make as big a sacrifices as her for their love and the sake of like kind of uniting their people or at least preventing an all-out war. So that is a recurring theme between those two characters in the movie. But again, the biggest difference is so in the story, kind of like the last minute before the fight breaks out, the mer princess decides to kind of selfishly, or not selfishly, selflessly take the potion and basically, she's like, hey, I'm going to be a human now. I'm going to get married to this dude and no more war. And also, Geralt, Essie, and Jaskier do kind of prove that, like, yeah, there was a conspiracy, like, the merfolk weren't intentionally trying to wage war and all that stuff. So basically, the whole battle is averted. There is a small skirmish between Geralt and the Vodnik, and I think maybe some of the merfolk, but that's about it. Whereas in the movie, there's like this big kind of epic sea battle where the human navy, British navy, is fighting the merfolk and the Vodniks, and then the Sea Witch turns into a kraken. I understand why they did that, just so that way you kind of make it a bit more action-packed and have like a cool third act. However, one thing I thought was odd and felt a little out of place is there's a small musical number between the Sea Witch and the Mer Princess, where basically the Sea Witch is kind of the one that concocts the potion, where the Mer Princess can turn into a human. And it felt kind of reminiscent of, like, The Little Mermaid. And I don't know, like, I just felt like as small as it was of a musical number, it just felt a little out of place. And then, when the Sea Witch turns into a giant kraken, also kind of reminded me of, like, The Little Mermaid, with Ursula kind of being sort of a Sea Witch type character. And so I don't know if that was intentional, like, maybe they were trying to, like, evoke nostalgia from The Little Mermaid. I don't know. But I just thought that musical number was, again, as brief as it was, just it felt a little out of place. And another change, kind of before I get into the climax of the movie, is, so at the end, like I said, in the story, the Mer Princess takes the potion and prevents the war from erupting. Whereas in the movie, after the battle takes place, Geralt defeats the Sea Queen, or Sea Witch, who takes the form of a kraken, and kind of basically ends the fight there. And then the prince kind of declares his love for the Mer Princess, and is like, hey, we can move past this. We didn't initiate this conflict. You all didn't initiate the conflict. We were both deceived. So then when the prince and the Mer Princess get married, and I kind of saw this coming just because what Netflix has changed from The Witcher lore, I feel like they're trying to subvert expectations for whatever reason. And so in the movie, the princess hands the prince the potion, and he takes it and then becomes a merman. So it's not something that is a huge deal, because again, ultimately it's a short story. It doesn't really impact a whole lot of like the grand overarching story in the Witcher books. But I guess if you're like a Witcher purist, you might take issue with that. I don't know. Like it didn't bother me, but I definitely saw that coming. I was like, I guarantee it, instead of the princess taking the potion, it's going to be the prince. And sure enough, that's what happened. But again, like with the whole climax, that I don't really take an issue with, because, yeah, even though that didn't actually happen in the story, I understand for the sake of adaptation, you want to add a little bit more, like, drama, you want to add a little bit more, action, stuff like that, so totally fine, and the end result is more or less the same, where an all-out war is averted, even though in the movie, there's a pretty good size, battle between the Mer people and Bernetfor. And I do like the animation style, because I think it's from Studio Mir. I don't recall at the top of my head if it's the same animation studio that did the Night of the Wolf, because I like that animation style as well, but also just as an anime fan, I like that they're adapting more stories from the Witcher's universe and actually doing them relatively well. Because even though this adaptation of Sirens of the Deep is different, it's still more accurate to the lore than seasons 2 and 3 of The Witcher. Because really, in slight tangent here, because I haven't talked a whole lot about like The Witcher on this channel compared to like Lord of the Rings, which is my all-time favorite book series. But digressing, into the side tangent. Really, the only thing season 2 had in common with the books is Geralt taking Ciri to basically train with the Witchers. That's about it. Everything else was completely made up for whatever reason, even though they had perfectly good books to go off of. Season 3, I feel like they tried to get back on track, but they had already changed so much from the books, and when they tried to get back on track, there was just a lot of stuff lost, and they didn't really develop enough of like some of the side characters and subplots that were pretty well established in the books, to where like when there's all these battles and characters dying, that it just doesn't really mean anything. At least it didn't to me. And so I found season 3, even though they were trying to get back on track with the books, it just didn't really matter at that point, because one, I found the execution to be poor, and also the overall writing I didn't love. And I do another thing that I do like about the animated movie Sirens of the Deep is, so they have a lot of the same cast from the Witcher live action show, like Joey Beatty, who plays Jaskier, Anya Chalotra as Yennefer, returned to voice their characters. But obviously, since they foolishly got rid of Henry Cavill, because he's a big fan of the books and the games, he didn't like the fact that they weren't adapting the source material, and so that's one of the reasons that caused the conflict between Henry Cavill and the creative people at Netflix and The Witcher. That's why he left. Or got fired, whichever. I don't know which one happened. But either way, Henry Cavill left. No longer The Witcher, which is a shame, because I really liked his portrayal. But with Henry Cavill not being in the role, I thought it was a smart choice to cast, I think it's Doug Cockles, who voiced Geralt in the video games. I think he does a really good job of voicing Geralt. And I will say, I think Essie, I really liked her in the story, and I liked her in the movie. I think she played maybe a slightly larger role than she did in the story in this movie. But overall, I still really liked the character. And I do like both in this movie and in the book, or the story, although I think the story did a little bit better job of, like, the kind of romance between Geralt and Essie, because if you've read the books or know anything about The Witcher, Geralt gets around, especially if you're a sorceress. About 90% of the sorceresses that he, like, meets, he sleeps with. So, and Essie is another one of the kind of, like, other women that he hooks up with in the stories. I think also one of the only non-sorceresses that he hooks up with. But overall, again, I like your character in the story. I do think they did a better job with their like romance in the story than in the movie. But I do think they kind of elevated her role a little bit more in this movie, which fine. I didn't like dislike it or anything like that. So I guess overall, Sirens of the Deep it's fairly enjoyable. Like, it's not great, but I think it's worth a watch. Like, especially if you don't have anything going on, you're a Witcher fan and kind of want something that's a bit more accurate to the books, unlike seasons 2 and 3. More reason to check it out. But yeah, that pretty much wraps up my review of The Witcher: Sirens of the Deep. And I will say, I'm more inclined to watch more, like, animated movies of, like, Witcher stories, because, again, it seems like they're I guess, more inclined to tell more accurate stories compared to The Witcher show, whereas Season 1 was pretty close to the books, because, and again, I think a lot of it's because Season 1 was more focused on, like, kind of the short stories in those first 2 books than the main narrative that starts with the book that's labeled book 1, but I guess it's technically book 3 in the chronological order of how they're released, at least in the Witcher book collection. But yeah, so I'm actually interested and again more inclined to watch if they release like movies that are based on like some of the other short stories that Andrzej Sapkowski wrote about Witcher or other characters in the Witcher world, compared to the next 2 seasons of The Witcher, because I'm pretty sure Netflix is going to end it after season 5, even though there's, I believe, 7 books altogether. But I'm trying to actually, let's see. I've got the books over here, and I can count. So there are 8 books. 8 books altogether, including the 2 books that kind of collect the short stories. So I could have easily done, like, 7 seasons, but I think probably because Henry Cavill's departure and recasting him with Liam Hemsworth, Netflix are probably like, let's just go ahead and wrap this up because the last 2 seasons have not been as popular as that first season was, and so they probably want to go ahead and just wrap this up before they, like, the fan base just drops off entirely. But yeah, so all that to say, all the digressing and side tangents aside, a pretty enjoyable movie. I'd say again, like if you're kind of bored one day and want to just pop on something to watch for, I think it's like an hour, just under an hour and a half, like hour 23 minutes, something like that. And I like, want a fun, like, fantasy movie to pop on, then yeah, Sirens of the Deep is a solid, entertaining watch. Would recommend. So yeah, that wraps up this review of The Witcher, Sirens of the Deep. Let me know what you thought below in the comments. If you watched it, if you're even interested in watching it, or if you're interested in watching season 4 and 5 of The Witcher with Liam Hemsworth in the role instead of Henry Cavill. Yeah, leave your thoughts below and do the usual YouTube-y stuff. Like, comment, subscribe, and all that jazz. And until next time, everyone, cheers.